Good evening, everyone. This is the Joint Finance Committee of the schools and the city. This is a second Joint Finance Committee, and tonight we have on our agenda a continuation of discussion of the school's budget, and then followed by a presentation of the annual audit. So we'll start with introductions. I'll just go ahead and read off the city people, and then I will turn it over to Finance Chair Bryden to do the school side. So just looking across my screen, we have Anna Bullitt, counselor from District 4, who's a member of the Finance Committee. Myself, I'm the chair of the Finance Committee for the city side and counselor for District 1. We have Regina Phillips, counselor for District 3. Kate Sykes, counselor for District 5. April Fournier, counselor at large and member of the Finance Committee. Brendan O'Connell, Finance Director for the city. Tiffany Mullen, our admin. Ann Bilodeau, Deputy Finance Director. I think that's everybody. All right, so Chair Bryden, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair. Hi, my name is Sarah Bryden. I'm the chair of the school side committee, and over on our side, it's called the Finance Operations and Personnel Committee. So with us tonight, we also have board member Julie Opperman, who is on the committee, board member Figdor, who's on the committee, and board member Noor, who's on the committee. And then we have board chair Lentz, and we have Superintendent Scallon here as well.
Great, and I see City Manager Danielle West has joined us. Also want to just let people know, Councilor Rodriguez had wanted to join us, but he's without power this evening. And Councilor Ali had also wanted to join us, and he's on a plane. So a couple of people not here that would have otherwise been. Okay, so we can go ahead. I think perhaps we're just turning this back over to the schools, or Brendan, did you have anything to tee up for our first item?
Nope, you can kick it right over to the schools, who I think plan on discussing anything that's happened on the budget since our last meeting. Okay,
perfect. So I'll hand it over to you again, Chair Bryden.
Thank you so much, Chair. Yes, so we are excited to have another opportunity to talk about the school budget. Since we last met in our last joint meeting, the school finance committee made some amendments and, as amended, passed that version of the budget on to the full board for first read. So that's where we are right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Scallon to go through some of the nuts and bolts of it and guide us through this part of the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you again. It's hard to believe that it was only a week ago at this time, since a lot has changed and a lot has happened in that time. So I'm happy to be here to give you an update. I apologize. Our finance director, our executive director of finance, is also without power. And so I get to walk us through this. If it's all right with the two chairs, I'd love to actually first just address proactively a couple of the audit pieces, just in our time, a little bit of the partnership with the city, and then give you the update on the budget, if that's all right with folks.
Sure.
Perfect. All right, let me pull up my screen here. So as I said, we'll go through this pretty quickly so that we can save as much time for the audit update as well as the questions. But I just want to share an update on our audit response and our financial practices, the partnership with the district, partnership with the city, and then budget updates. The district has been actively working to address the weaknesses and deficiencies that you will have seen identified in the audit. As a reminder, the audit's looking at fiscal year 23 that ended in June, as well as years back in recommendations. And so on the left of the screen, you see what was raised as audit concerns. And then on the right, you will see the actions that the district has taken and continues to take around this. And so there are several that were identified as multi-year and follow-up pieces. So one was around the segregation of duties between finance and human resources. As you know, probably even more than I do, the district and finance and HR has, over the last several years, have been understaffed and had a high number of turnover. And so part of the work that our executive director of finance has been doing and our senior staff is around making sure that we're fully staffed and that we have clear segregation of duties there. Part of this started in January with the launch of our new payroll system, where during that process, controls were added to reset the access of users to align with job functions to better create a segregation of duties. The second is around reviewing purchasing card transactions and making sure that there's supporting documentation that is reviewed monthly. It's the fact that we want to make sure that our schools have supplies and resources ready when students need it. And sometimes purchasing cards are the best way and quickest way to do that, but we need to make sure that we have processes in place to ensure financial controls. Our executive director of finance has been working with our purchasing manager to update the processes and procedures for our purchasing cards, and now reviewing those purchases on a monthly basis against supporting documentation. There was a finding around adopting a cash receipt policy. As you can imagine, as a school, we have a number of ways that we receive cash. That is an ongoing piece, and I'll share a little bit about how we are addressing that in the next slide. The fourth is, and this relates to the cash piece, but we have student activity funds at each of our schools. And so across our 18 schools, each one of them has a student activity fund. And so this year, in partnership with Barry Dunn, who we contracted with to support and build capacity, we have done an internal audit assessment of an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. And that allowed us to start to think about what the best practices are and next steps are to manage and support our internal functioning around student activity funds. There was a finding for multiple years around reviewing and updating accrued vacation to make sure that staff did not show balances in excess of our contracts. As part of our movement to our new payroll system, we did review and adjust vacation and sick balances. And so those are now updated. And then the last was a new one this year, which was resolve cash variances promptly. And this is something that, as you'd see in the response, the city and the district finance team are working on together to make sure that there's a process in place to do this. And so there are a number of audit findings that go back multiple years. And while we have not addressed all of them and put all of them away where there were not continuing issues, we've made actions already, even before receiving the final audit report, to make sure that we were addressing these areas. There are also, though, future actions that we must take to continue to strengthen our financial procedures. We need to continue to staff. And so there's 3 positions that I highlight there. We are hiring a new executive director of human resources. And in our finance team, we are, if this budget is approved, we will be posting and hiring for an accountant manager and a payroll specialist to continue to build out the capacity in those 2 key teams to make sure that we can have true separation of duties. The second area, as this impacts our overall financial health and systems, is that we're working with our new payroll system to ensure that there are reports that allow for seamless uploads of both our general ledger and our Maine PERS reporting. As you can see in the audit findings, one of the things it talked about was some of our processes are manual, and manual processes open us up to more likely errors. And so we are working with ADP to see if we can get those reports to allow for seamless uploading. The third is, while we've started to codify and better define and work through our purchasing card processes, that is continued work. We've done the audit internally to understand our current practices around student activity funds. And in the future, we will be adopting a student activity fund practice, an SOP. We'll be working to develop and adopt a cash receipt policy. Our plan right now is to have that in place by the end of this current fiscal year. As I say this, I also just want to add a couple of additional notes. and to make sure that we're going into this year or continued year with a common understanding. The first is that because we continue to develop and implement systems and to work through practices, we do anticipate that there will likely be audit findings in FY24 as well. We made the adjustment to our new payroll system in December or January, and so that's when we really got to the segregation of duties. And so since an audit looks at your practices across the whole year, we do expect that we'll continue to have findings, but that we'll see improvement and progress in this area. The second is that we've done work, as I've shared here and in other settings before, around looking at addressing past issues. And so last year, the district contracted with Spinglass to do an audit around voluntary retirement. We're working with Barry Dunn around our Maine PERS reporting, and that's been heavily focused on this past fiscal year. And we may need over the next year to expand that, to just make sure that we're really looking out for our employees and the financial transactions over a number of years. And the one piece that makes me say that, just to be fully transparent, is in our work with Maine PERS, they did ask about a couple of retirement payments that were aligned in 2017. And so we're working with them on that. And we're not clear yet if that's an isolated incident or something more, but just wanted to share that out as we talk about the audit findings. I'm going to transition here now because part of the audit talks about how our systems and finance overlap, right? And there is a need for clear partnership and alignment between the district and the city. And so I've appreciated, as someone new to that partnership, both the work of Brendan and individuals on his team, Ethan and individuals on their team, and Danielle, and across the city, the partnerships that exist already between the district and the city. And I wanted to highlight, just because this is our second combined time, some areas for potential future work. The first is, again, cash variances was one example in the audit report, but recognizing that our financial systems overlap, just making sure that there are really clear working practices between the city and the district financial teams. And so we have a common understanding of who has responsibility for posting things to the general ledger or other accounting practices. The second is around coordination that goes beyond finance. And so I just want to give a big thank you to the city and to the city manager for the work around support for our homeless students. That is something that we've been really thinking about, the coordination all year. And so just this past week, or this week actually, when the additional shelter space opened up for, or the housing capacity opened up for students to be housed, and we were able to partner around that and immediately provide services so that we could get some students enrolled in school, was absolutely great. And so it was just a really good example of where, when we're partnered, we're able to support our students and our families even better. An example of where I think we could continue to do this better was highlighted around HVAC and how we budgeted for HVAC in this year. This is an area where the city, in their conversations, added capacity and added staffing without consulting the district. And so I really appreciate that when this was raised, Brendan jumped on it and we were able to resolve it. But that continued coordination, I think, is something that's really important. There's also a question that's come up in this budget process around shared financial responsibilities between the city and the district that I just want to talk about briefly. Right now, I don't think we have a clear definition of how we deal with where we provide a financial service from the city to the district or the district to the city, and how we consistently do that. And as just an example of that, if we use facilities, we pretty consistently pay for the use of facilities, but recently got asked for the city to use buses where the city asked to not pay for the buses. And again, this is something where I think it's such a minor example, but just highlights where we could coordinate and do better around these practices as we use the audit as an opportunity to reflect. Another example of potential work in this that I'm excited about and has been going on this year is around really defining an MOU with the facilities team at the city so that we're clear about who has responsibility for cost, opening the building, custodial services, et cetera, the use of outdoor space, things that I think will just really help our relationship as we continue to move forward. And then just one other piece that has come up in our budget process, and I just want to highlight for counselors that I think is an area for future conversation, is around making sure that there's shared financial benefits of our collective fund balances. So right now, the district has over a $10 million fund balance, and the city is kind enough to hold that for us. But I don't believe we see any of the financial benefit that comes from investing that or even just putting it in a savings account. And so that's an area where I'd love for us to explore in the future. And then just I want to give, as our committee chair, Bryden, shared some updates on our budget since the March 28th meeting. On the left, you'll see what adjustments we've made on revenue, and on the right, you'll see what adjustments we've made on expenses. The Finance Committee on April 1st passed amendments that added $300,000 in budgeted revenue. This budgeted revenue is from an increase in our estimate of how much we will receive in Maine care reimbursement. The district has, for a number of years, budgeted and received some money in Maine care, and then over the last, I think, year, had not pursued that reimbursement. The proposed budget from March 5th did not have Maine care revenue in it. And so after the Finance Committee meeting, we added $300,000 of Maine care revenue. On the expense side, you see both some reductions in budgeted expenses, as well as some increases in staffing that came out of the Finance Committee. First, starting at the top, we decreased how much we estimate we will need to spend in PFML, as well as in benefits. We did increase in Finance Committee the number of school-based staff that were budgeted by 10 FTE, to a total cost of $770,000. We could get into the specifics of this, but it includes teachers, education technicians, extended learning time opportunity coordinators, among others. We added back to the budget 5 central office staff for a total of $507,000. Well, these are called central office staff. Many of them have direct to student services and are student facing, such as our special education coordinator for students with IEPs as they transition out of our high schools, our multilingual transition coordinator that supports our multilingual students, oftentimes going from one of our high schools to Portland Adult Ed. And so there are 5 capacity there. And then there were 2 strategic investment capacity positions. These are both at the central office. One is aligned with Maine Care to support us in achieving that $300,000 or even more in reimbursements. The second is an individual to support work around potentially redistricting, as well as thinking about our middle school model and our middle school enrollment patterns. I put these both in the strategic investment capacity position because they're designed to both increase our future revenue as well as decrease future expenses. And so they're designed to really be both actionable next year as well as forward-looking to support us as we go to that mission of continuing to build a sustainable organizational structure over time. And so on the expense side, the total increase that you see here is for $613,000. Want to highlight just a couple of pieces, though. The total combined with the increase in expenses of 613 and the increase in revenue, there was a total increase in $313,000, of which we used fund balance to cover that. And so from the budget proposal you saw last week, or that was presented on March 5th, the Finance Committee did not increase the tax rate. And so it remains at the proposed rate of 6.85% increase. And so just wanted to share that with you. With that, I will turn it back to the chairs for discussion and questions.
Okay, we're looking for hands at this point. We will each of us call on our respective sides. Who wants to go first? Okay, Councilor Bullitt.
Really try not to be first, but I will tonight. I don't really have any questions other than to say thank you. This was great. I do want to emphasize that the Maine Care piece, I think, is huge. And I'm so glad you guys were able to identify that opportunity. And I agree that hiring someone to help you navigate that will be important. I know just as someone who works at a place where we bill Maine Care, it's messy. There's also a lot of changes coming that I think you will likely be able to optimize, within your budget and for your students, right? Like let's when I focus on the outcomes for the students, I don't want to lose sight of that. I don't want to just talk about the money. So great job on that. That's awesome. And then I also wanted, I'm trying to read my notes. I also just want to emphasize that I know audits are super stressful. So like all the love and support to the people that had to do this audit, because I know as someone who goes through lots of audits, how hard it is. And so for me, I always think of them as opportunities, and I can see how you've done that here. Like it's so crystal clear. So great job. I mean, such a great opportunity to ensure that there's easy to access systems that are strong for people who are doing the work. And what I mean by that is if a social worker who works with homeless students needs to use her P card and she can't find the tax exempt form because it's nowhere easy to get to, like that's where you end up with audit findings. I'm sure, like I can imagine it's things like that. So I think that the stronger you can get those systems, the easier for staff to access the tools that they need, the more compliance you'll have. And so I just want to like continue to emphasize like those strong and get people who are doing the work to help you inform those systems. I'm sure you're already doing that, but I can't emphasize that enough. You need that social worker who's running around town with her P card, to tell you what she needs or whatever. So great job. I think it's awesome. I was happy to see some of those budget changes as well. And I really support this, and I'll stop at that, but I'm happy to support it. And thank you so much for being here again in a snowstorm.
Thank you so much. I just want to interject, Chair, before we go to Council Fortier. I just wanted to make sure to acknowledge that board member Billiou has joined us as well. So she was not here when we did introductions. I wanted to say that. So sorry, I'll go back on mute.
Thank you for that. I think she was stuck over on the attendee side. Councilor Fournier.
Thank you so much. And yes, I echo thank you for being here in the middle of the snowstorm. Thankfully, we get to do this by Zoom, so it makes it a little bit easier, and hopefully everybody is warm. So I had the opportunity to meet with Superintendent and Chair Lentz earlier this week just to have a chance to really connect and talk about some of the post-budget meetings. But what I really appreciate in this, and I feel like you heard some of the concerns probably from your own community and then also from us as we had our meeting last week, just around some of those very frontline reductions in staff for ed techs, for those really student impact positions. And I think you really got creative and had some good news, which we always like having good news with the revenue adjustment for Maine Care, for the paid family leave reduction, for the benefits reduction. So I think it was really just a lot of smart work and hard work that went into how can we keep those cuts again away from the students as much as possible. and then being able to use fund balance to make sure that even though we were adding those resources back in, it wasn't going to impact the tax rate more. And so I think you found some really creative ways and important ways to be able to find that. And just, I think as we continue our partnerships, Brendan is an incredible resource and our whole finance team is a really incredible resource, I think, to continue that partnership. So I'm excited to hear that's continuing, but really no other feedback other than, thank you. This is really, really hard work. There is so much that we want to do and so much I think that our students deserve. I think what we have seen is we are coming out of, some challenging times where we had to say, and we talked about this a little bit when we met earlier in the week, is when you think about what our schools went through, through the pandemic and all of the different things that we had to adjust and adapt to in a crisis. And yes, there were, limited time funds, that came with COVID. But I think what we saw and what you can never anticipate in a situation like that is you have different students and different teachers and a different environment that comes out of all of that. And so something that may have just intended to be, we're just going to put this in place to get us through this crisis, or we're just going to address this need in just this way, just for this little bit of time. And then we think maybe the environment will change, or maybe things will change. And then we find out actually it doesn't, or it's an important resource that we need to have in an ongoing basis, or it's an important position that we need to invest in because we have different types of learners emerging from the pandemic, or we have a different environment that we're trying to navigate in the pandemic. And so I'm grateful that we have, some members of the public here watching tonight. And of course, ultimately, this is going to go to the voters to decide. But I just really would encourage, as people are thinking about the reasons that they get frustrated with the budget or the use of, COVID funds, we had to do it on the city side as well, is that, they're strategic investments for a reason. And I think when you're in just an unknown situation and then you emerge from it, you have to then kind of do that assessment of the new landscape and say, okay, what we learned from this process is now it can't be just that single strategic investment. This has to be an ongoing investment. And we have to change some of the ways that we've always done things. I know kindergarten isn't taught the same way now as it was when I went to kindergarten. And all of my experiences going through school and my experiences being a parent and watching them go through school, I think what makes our school so strong is the ability to adapt and evolve and partner and really be responsive to the community. So just applaud you a lot for these investments. I think they're really incredibly important. So thank you so much. I don't have any other questions, but I look forward to supporting it.
Thank you, Counselor. See, there's a hand up, but I can't tell who it is. Oh, Counselor Sykes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. I really appreciate this explanation. I also, though I wasn't here for the last meeting, I did watch I rolled the tape on that. So I feel like I'm up to speed. I just would like to echo some of the concerns that the superintendent has raised here around fund balance. It's something that I brought up in our capital improvement process budget at the council level. And I would just like to sort of talk about that here as well, also for members of the public who may be tuning in. It is extremely frustrating as a new counselor, especially, to be asked to make very high level decisions about how much I feel the taxpayers should be burdened this year without having good information about what our fund balance policy is, how much is in those balances, and how we use them, and how that goes back and forth between the city and the schools. I fear that there's quite a bit of inequity here. And I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing going forward. And so I just want to say that I'm here for a really in-depth, thoughtful discussion about fund balances as we look towards the next year's process. Because for instance, we've seen some amendments that have now pulled $313,000 out of fund balance, and I don't know what your fund balance policy is. I don't know how much more there is. I don't know if now we've dipped below an acceptable level according to your policy. So I have big questions about that at a really high level that make me feel pretty uncomfortable. So the other piece is that I'm a little unsatisfied with the amount of documentation that I have to assess the school budget over a fairly long period of time. So, the pandemic kind of blew up everyone's budgets, and I understand that. But when we use a zero-based budget going forward, and sometimes I know that that's important to do. We have a new superintendent. We've had a lot of change, but it sort of erases the historical actual expenditures. And so I just don't feel like I have enough information pre-pandemic, post-pandemic in terms of actual expenses to understand how things are rising and falling over time. It looks to me like since 2017, there's been a 36% increase in the school budget. That may be reasonable. We may have been underfunded, and we're just catching up. But I don't have any way to really evaluate that without looking at actual expenditures over time. I also don't know what the per pupil expenditure is for Portland Public Schools, and I think that's really important in terms of benchmarking. I'd like to look at that, around the state, around the country, see how Portland is faring around our per pupil expenses over time again. So I just have to voice some of my concerns about the level of documentation in terms of the packet, the amount of information we've been given. There was a link back to the school district's website at one point that has now disappeared from the packet. I can't find it anywhere, which actually showed us several years of budget information that I would like to go through again, but now I can't find it. I've looked all over the internet. So so just some concerns there. I trust our school board colleagues. I feel like you're doing a great job. I want to make sure that that efficiencies are being taken care of. And that's really my area of interest. As far as what the money is being spent on, I trust all of my elected colleagues on the school board. I just want to make sure we're being as efficient and fair as possible. So I don't know, maybe we can talk offline about potentially getting me some of that information. Thanks.
I do just have one quick thought on a specific part of what you just talked about, Councillor Sykes. And I think I heard you say a 36% increase from 2017 to today. One thing that's different about this year is looking at the total spend versus just the local budget that gets voted on. And Superintendent Scanlon, I'll ask you to maybe flesh that out, that idea out a little bit more in terms of the historical versus this year's approach.
Yeah, happy to do that. So this year we chose to budget at this time and show an estimated budget for all funds. And so that includes title funds, what's remaining of ESSER funds, et cetera. And the reason we did that is to be able, I think, Councillor Sykes, to show more of a apples to apples comparison of what you're asking for, right? Which is, how does the total budget for next year compare to what is currently spent this year and what was spent the year before? And so part of the reason for that is that almost all of our reduction, right, from this current year to next year is in funds that wouldn't be captured in a local budget because they are, for the most part, a reduction in COVID funds. And so that's a $9.5 million decrease. And so we wanted to budget and show all of it. And so as a quick high level, I was trying to find the exact slide that was shared last week that had the sort of picture of the 2 years and the difference between local and non-local funding. But our overall budget goes from 163 million proposed to between 161 and 162 million currently with the Finance Committee. So that's a reduction, and all of that reduction is sitting in non-local. We can share with you what was actual spends for several years. And so our budget book has the actual for FY23. And then we have the actuals going back from that. So happy to share that and do that. On the fund balance piece, there's a couple of pieces. So my piece on it was less about the budget, but more about what happens to any investment or earnings on fund balance I remember Brendan presenting a couple months ago about the unexpectedly positive news around the amount of revenue. And so curious how we can sort of also recognize that on the district side for our fund balance use. Our fund balance going into this year that we're in right now was between $14 and $15 million, if I have it right off the top of my head, somewhere right around there. We're using $3.6 million of it this year. And the budget proposal from March 5th was to use $3.5 million of it. The proposal now with the Finance Committee is to use $3.8 million of it. Again, with some expectation that that's a budgeted amount, and so it may adjust. The state does not allow the district to carry the level of fund balance that the city does. And so I think it was last meeting when the council was discussing the CIP, and it was talked about keeping, I think, 2 months of reserves. The district during COVID was allowed to keep, I think, up to 9%. And then the state changes it over the next couple of years to go down to 5%. And our board policy does not allow us, and I'm looking for our board members to nod and confirm this, but I believe our board policy does not allow it to go below 3%. And so there is a piece that in our budget book, we look at the fund balance and we look at how it is estimated to be spent over the next 5 years. And that was deliberately done for 2 reasons. One is to, as much as possible, avoid operating costs in our fund balance because we don't want to do reoccurring costs. And the second is similar to the city. In 2 years, our pension obligation bond comes off. And so we thought about how to step down fund balance use as that comes off so that it balances out.
That was a really good explanation. Thank you. Councillor Sykes, is that sufficient to answer your question for now?
It is, and I also thank you for the opportunity to look at the budget books, because I would like to take you up on that just to kind of get myself oriented to the long range picture.
I would suggest too, I'm sure the schools would be happy to meet one-on-one with you to review any and all that. All of the information you're looking for exists. It's just a matter of how deep you want to go and in what forum. So it's tough in these joint finance committee meetings to really get into a nitty-gritty level, especially since we at the council level are only really, we just approve the final, number. We're not really it's not really our purview to go line by line, but if you need that level of detail to get there, you're welcome to do that. I don't see any other hands right now. I will just say that I really appreciate the presentation again, and I appreciate the school finance committee's work on this. I understand the sort of strategic add backs. My one question was how you are calculating your projection for the Maine Care revenue. I asked that only because I recall several years ago when we were kind of building out the behavioral health program, it was our first year in adding a number of BHPs, and we sort of over calculated our revenue and ended up having to make a big transfer. So I'm just kind of trying to get an idea to make sure that that's not a place of potential concern.
Yeah, I can say a couple of thoughts about that and then turn it over to the superintendent to add more detail. So at a high level, I would say it was a combination of reviewing historical reimbursement amounts over the last several years with also a degree of caution around, banking on any set number, also impacts to staff who will have to, do the paperwork, that sort of thing, and not just the staff person that Superintendent Scallon talked about in terms of the additional role in central office, but the actual, people who are in schools and working with students. Superintendent Scallon, what would you add to that?
I mean, I think that's right? It's a budget, and we're trying to find a good indicator of what's the right amount, right? And so there's factors that indicate that it potentially should be higher, right? So the state is going through a process of reviewing its main care. One of the counselors spoke to this, and so it may be easier to bill back, but we don't have that guidance yet. And so there's some optimism there that it may be higher, but we also looked at past. And there's a piece where there's always good news if we get more revenue than we budgeted, right? It's not like we're going to get to $300,000 and stop. But there's risk on the flip side of if we over budget and then have to correct. And so I think your caution is exactly what we did. And so we looked at past and tried to say what feels right. And the addition of the staff member, which is a position that had historically not been there, made us feel a little bit better.
Right. I noted that too. I as a paralegal, I bill for my hours, but it's not like billing Medicare. So I think let's see. Okay.
Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow up to Councillor Sykes' want. I did that on just looking at the budget books from 2017 to now, and there is that change. It's interesting. The growth is more exponential, but I can't from the budget books determine the number of things that had to be added in because of the changing population of the school. The school hasn't increased its per number of pupils exponentially, but so it's a very difficult thing to look at that level. So it would be, I don't know how deep we can get into it, but that's something to let you know. I can share that data with you if you wish.
Councillor Sykes.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking a look at that. And I think I have the link to the budget books now, so I think maybe I can get in and take a look at it myself. Thank you. One other question I remembered that I had as well at the last meeting, we talked, I think that was the superintendent had mentioned something about the difficulty of filling ed tech positions. I know that some ed tech positions have been added back into this budget, and I think that's a good thing. I've spoken with some teachers, and I feel like in special ed specifically, it seems like there needs to be more help there. So I think it's great, but I also know that just adding FTEs doesn't always solve the problem. And so I'm curious how many ed tech positions are open now, and what sort of plan there is beyond just adding these FTEs in to make sure that we're getting folks in there and that they're staying and that they're happy.
I would invite the superintendent to share about that. Yeah.
Happy to address that. So first, just also want to acknowledge that we are literally right now kicking off our negotiations with our ed tech union. And so one of the things we know is that our starting pay for an ed tech is lower than what they may earn if they're working fast food in some places. And so we really need to look at the pay rate that is available to them. Another piece is we know that there's a hiring piece, but you also highlighted the fact that it starts with a retention, right? Of how do we make sure of that? And so we are thinking about how do we continue to make sure that all of our positions are staffed so that our ed techs aren't overstretched, right? That they're able to get a lunch break, that they're able to get time to regroup and all of that. And so that's part of it. And overall, our strategic plan also calls out, because most of our ed techs are in special education, really looking at our special education programming and figuring out exactly what it is that can support. To your question around ed techs, one of the things that the budget does is it shifts the overall population of ed techs so that there's more of a concentration in our specialized programs to also deal with this. Our HR and equity lead just texted me, our executive director there just texted me that there are about 8 ed tech roles currently posted, and all of them are in specialized programs and in special education. So it just highlights that that's where our need is. And so the finance committee added back 5 ed tech positions in their meeting on Monday. And so we will be looking at our, high poverty schools as well as our specialized programs for placing those ed techs into the budget for this coming year.
Thank you.
Okay, looking for any last hands before we wrap up this item. We don't have, Chair Lynn?
Chair Lance, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to express gratitude for the city councilors that have been involved in this process so far. It has just been a really great and collaborative experience. And I feel like the questions that you've asked and the ways that you've approached conversations have really helped us make a stronger budget. So I just wanted to name that and acknowledge it, and just look forward to continuing in the process, both with the budget and then these bigger systemic pieces, so that we can be the best joint force that we can be.
Thank you, Chair. And we appreciate working with you as well. We think you've done great work, and we don't have any action on this item tonight. I think next is going to be, our next item on this will be your presentation to us. Is that right? And then we'll be taking it into our hands for a vote.
Yeah, if I have this right, let's just confirm this. It is to the whole council on the 20th, I believe, or is it to the finance committee on the 20th?
I think it's to the whole council.
Great.
And then it gets referred to our finance committee.
Perfect. So looking forward to it.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Chair Lentz, you were saying something?
I think it's the 22nd, not the 20th.
Great.
Just double checking the dates.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you about that. Sorry about that.
And I'll just remind anyone from the public who's watching, there's a public hearing on the 25th at this committee. First of 3 opportunities to give your public comments to the city council.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that wraps up this item, and we are on to the audit. So I will turn it over to Brendan.
Sure, yes, and I'm just going to turn it over to our audit engagement partner, Alina Korsak from Markham. Last year it was Melanson, but they were acquired by one of the larger accounting firms in the nation, Markham. Maybe it's been more than a year now, but I'll let you tell the story, Alina.
Thank you, Brendan. You're correct. It's exactly a year and 3 months, so close enough. We have been acquired by Markham, and we've now been merged into their practices. And I'm here to present some summary audit results, and I do have a PowerPoint, and I'm not sure if it's going to go on, or am I sharing?
I think you can share directly if you would like.
You.
And one thing I will share about the merger between Markham and Melanson, one of the reasons they acquired Melanson is because of their strength in their government auditing practice.
Thank you, Brendan. That is accurate. We were the leader in New England when it came to governmental auditing, and that strengthened our practice in our New England region. I will now share. As I mentioned, we're just going to go through summary audit results of the audit for the year that just ended June 30, 2023. And we're going to mention a little bit on the management letter as well. So what does an audit involve? It's really getting documentation, support in documents that are able to support every material item on the financial statements, including your disclosures, and also express an opinion on your financial statements. Your management does an amazing job putting the financial statements together, and the only thing that really belongs to us in that large document is the audit opinion. Because this is a financial statement audit, we do not express an opinion on effectiveness of the city's internal controls. Now, the overall audit process went well. I mean, this does appear late, but the late completion is very consistent with prior years. The challenges that we incurred with the school department, really, there were still turnover issues, so it's more repeat comments from the previous year. So it included a material weakness and a significant deficiency that we'll go over later. When it comes to new standards from the Governmental Accounting Standard Board, management does an amazing job. So the ones that were applicable for June 30, 2023 year were actually implemented early in fiscal year 22. So there were no new statements implemented in fiscal year 23. The next upcoming statement, GASB 102, which relates to concentrations and constraints, financial statement disclosure type of items, is not applicable until the fiscal year 25. So as a result of our audit, the opinion that we expressed on the financial statements was unmodified, which means there were nothing that we needed to do, no modifications necessary for your financial statements to be in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP. We did not have any uncorrected misstatements or disagreements with management or any material corrected misstatements. The reports we provided, of course, is the opinion, as I mentioned. Because this is a financial statement audit, we don't provide an opinion on the introductory section in the front or the statistical section in the back, because the City of Portland files an annual comprehensive financial report. It's a certificate of excellence that they get from GFOA. So it's a more comprehensive financial statement report than a typical financial statement report. We also do not express an opinion on the management discussion and analysis. That's just comes from management, and it's not part of the financial statement audit opinion. And neither does the required supplementary information, which comes right before the statistical section. We do provide a separate opinion because the city does a separate JetPort financial statements. There are some other documents that go along with that. The passenger facility charge audit, the JetPort covenant certificate. There's a school assurance statement that we confirm. There is a governance letter that we issued. There's a management letter. There's a GAGAS report, which is more known as a Yellow Book report. And the last three items here, even though it says to be provided, they actually were filed and completed. So the federal single audit report was filed on March 29th. This PowerPoint was done a little before that. So was the State Health and Human Service single audit report was filed on March 29th. And the governmental audit procedural form that went to the Maine State Auditor was done earlier this week. So all the reports that we provide to you were completed. As I mentioned, I'm not going to go into too much of that because really what's contributed to this was just the repeated turnovers. So there was no opportunity to really get much ahead on these items, but the material weakness had to do with internal control structure, particularly segregation of duties, payroll, for example, with the HR and payroll segregation of duties. But from what we understand and what we heard from the school department is that with ADP conversion from the beginning of this calendar year, there were some restrictions that were put in where HR now does the rates and payroll has view-only access and payroll processes and HR has view-only access. So from what we understand, there were improvements that were made, and we will see those improvements when we do fiscal year 24 audit. The other comment, the significant deficiency comment, the material weakness is a little more concerning, the significant deficiency in the explanations of these. And the significant deficiency was really on items that, again, were lingering for many years and the school did not have opportunity to address. And that's really improving internal controls over purchase and card transactions, cash receipts policy, student activity funds, and internal audits related to any of these transactions, as well as accrued vacation excess balances that came up as an issue in the past. And from what we understand that prior to the ADP conversion, there were school adjustments made on the considered absences, which reflected really the maximum contract balances. So that should not be an issue going forward. And there was another repeat comment. It was just a recommendation, not a significant deficiency or material weakness, but we still recommend that the city does consider an internal audit function because we believe it's critical for the city to have that function to be able to complement the external financial statement audit, particularly because it's not a internal control examination, and it's just to be able to have someone who can have, for example, surprise checks on various transactions, or just be able to evaluate certain transactions or control areas for improvements. Some of the new comments were to improve information technology controls, and we understand that there were privileged accesses and that the COSO best practices really do promote least privilege access. So we just felt like we should include that in a management letter just to consider tightening up those accesses. And as well as we had a comment on cash variance, although they were identified timely, but it seemed like the process, again, due to school turnover, took a while to resolve those variances. So we're hoping for improvement of that as well for fiscal year 24. And then we'll go into the items that come directly from your annual comprehensive financial report. This is your general fund budget versus actual, and it's on page 43. So this is just the summary totals. The budget, original budget was a balanced budget of $401.9 million. And then the final budget included an additional amount for expenditures. So you budgeted for a deficit of about $1.3 million. The revenues came close, within $554,000 in total, and the expenditures were under $20 million. But it's important to note that that budget was being prepared based on the prior monthly expenditure projections for the Health and Human Services. So included in that unspent appropriation was the $19 million in social services, which does correlate with a shortage of intergovernmental revenues as compared to budget. And this is your unassigned fund balance as a percentage of your most recent approved expenditures at the time. So if you look at 6/30/22, the $66.2 million out of $395 million represented 16.7%. And at 6/30/23, the $69.6 million out of $405.7 million was 17.2%. The percentage is pretty consistent. It's pretty much what we would hope to have the 2 months of expenditures, as was Billy mentioned earlier by someone. And there is a note here, and I believe I heard it from your presentation earlier, that the school is planning to use some of their portion of the unassigned fund balance for the fiscal year 25 operating budget. I put the slide in here because I really do believe it's critical to note that Health and Human Services expenditures of $33 million fiscal year 22 is an increase of 81% since that year, to which currently for fiscal year 23 they totaled $60.5 million. So the reason I wanted to put this slide in here is because I really hope, my goal and my hope, that the council would influence policies to be able to reduce some of these expenditures. And on this slide, this is your general obligation bonds, but also your other long-term loans, meaning this is public offering and your direct borrowing with various state agencies, and this also includes the revenue bonds for Jetport. So if you look for 23, that detail, if you're looking for that, is on page 84 of your annual comprehensive financial report. And for the revenue bonds for Jetport, that's page 86, and there is a nice detail that your management puts in there for those balances if you want to look at the various different bond issues and loans. And that's concluding my side of the presentation, and turning over to you, Brandon, for any of your comments. I should have told you to interrupt me throughout conversation.
Thank you. And I guess this is probably a good time to address the two comments that were directed towards the city in your findings. Number one was the improve IT technology controls. And that one, I'm nearly 100% certain we'll be able to easily address, and it won't be a comment in next year's audit. Essentially, when they were auditing Munis, they found that a number of new employees were set up with controls that were outside of their areas of expertise. So some people, like in human resources, like safety, might have had controls in the accounting area of the database. And so obviously this is something that we can quickly address by having standardized controls. So we're working on a policy with IT. The other comment that has been there for a number of years is consider an internal audit function. And that is something that, we definitely have looked at for a number of years. Our purchasing manager now, their title is actually purchasing and controls manager. And we had hoped that they would be able to split some of their time and dedicate it towards looking at some of these areas of internal audit. We talked about the P cards, and that is an area on the city side that we're always looking at. We also have fuel cards, things like that. So I thought there was a natural synergy between purchasing and internal audit, some of the internal audit functions. In the city manager's recommended budget for this year, there's actually a slight increase in staffing and finance. It's only 0.6 FTE. But part of the reason that you're going to see that is to address this comment, and it's also to address a significant increase in the number of projects that we are seeing in the next few years, a number of funds that are coming in both from state and federal sources, and also an increase in the number that we've approved through the CIP as well.
Are we on questions at this point? Councilor Sykes.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't in the packet. Again, I am super frustrated that I don't have all of this information right in front of me to be able to review before this meeting or even after this meeting. So the elements of this review that relate to the city are brand new to me right now. Can we please have some more information on this so that I can understand the fund balance better and also understand these issues with the audit? And so the reference was to go to the comprehensive, the city manager's annual comprehensive report. That should be in here as well so that we can understand that. I don't know. I'm new, but this is kind of nuts to me.
Brendan, those materials were they added or linked to the agenda?
Yeah, we should have had links in there to the management letter from the auditors and also the annual comprehensive financial report. We can have the actual documents, the ACFR, as it's called. It's like 190 pages. And as the audit partner noted, the city typically receives an award for going above and beyond just the basic level of requirements that are included in there. The audit is required to be completed within 270 days of year end. And as soon as it was completed, we added those documents to the financial statement pages of the website. And there's also a portion for the management letters as well. So that's at portlandmaine.gov/finance.
Other questions, comments? I was curious about the recommendation to pursue an internal auditor and if the city has thoughts about that.
So, I don't think we have felt the need rose above some of the other new position requests that have come in over the past few years. It's always a competition for available funds amongst, all departments in terms of what they're asking for. And, some of the newer positions that you've seen in multiple, I think we have 3 FTE now in JDEI. We have a new recruiter position that just started this past year. So it is tough. And I know every single department has needs. So the city manager's recommended budget typically reflects, all of that balancing. And so this year there is kind of that 0.6 you'll see on Monday night. If things don't change in the next 72 hours, that there's 0.6 new FTE within finance to attempt to address some of this. And part of it is also just related to an increase in workload overall with the number of dollars that are going to be coming in to the city. I know you guys hear from Director Bradbury at the Jetport quite a bit, and the Jetport has over $40 million of projects coming in mostly through federal dollars. The council just approved 106 new capital improvement plan projects, and some of them are emergencies that kind of rose to the top and jumped the line in front of many of the other projects that staff was already working on. So, it's a combined purchasing and controls manager that we have that we're hoping to free up some of their time to do more of that internal audit work in the upcoming fiscal year.
Got it. Councillor Bullitt, and then I'll turn it over to my co-chair to call on her side.
Thanks so much. I do have a question, Director O'Connell, but first I'll just say my statement. I appreciate the improved IT internal controls, and I just want to say I don't always think that more bodies, FTEs, is always the answer, because I think some of that might, like the internal control piece, might improve too. And I would just also emphasize the importance of training for staff on the tools that they have. As someone who's used Financial Edge, Workday, Blackbaud, like as someone who's had to do these things, there's a huge learning curve. And so I would just emphasize that, like, maybe, yes, more FTE, but also more money for training for people that are doing this work, because if they don't know what to be looking for, or if the system, if they're overriding the system when it's like, hey, what are you doing? That can be really helpful. And so I'm happy to see that improved IT controls. And then here's my question. Just going back to the HHS budget, and I know we'll get this information later, but I want to say this. I want you to say this now. Can you give us a sense of what percent, if any, of that 60 million is from grants or state or federal matching? I would assume that whole 60 million is not all.
So I will be able to pull that percentage, but in regards to the FY23 results alone, we were setting the budget at a time when the city was spending $4 to $5 million per month on hotels for asylum seekers that were rapidly arriving, and we were seeing an unprecedented level of arrivals. I know HHS was sharing the monthly numbers on 1,400 people being housed, 1,500 people being housed, and all of a sudden, it slowed down, and people were able to start. We were able to start reducing the use of the hotels, and that's going to be a theme in the state budget, because they were looking at ways to reduce their spend. They were wondering why things peaked so quickly. So, there was a savings in the GA budget because of the reduced use of hotels. But at the same time, there was a corresponding 70% reduction in the revenue, because 70% of every single one of those hotel rooms was being covered by the state of Maine. And during the pandemic, almost 100% of those hotels were being covered from the other 30% was almost being covered by FEMA. So, through other emergency funds, it was 20-something% FEMA, and then another 7.5% from MEMA. So nearly 100% of those expenditures were being covered. In this upcoming state budget, they are really putting pressure on municipalities to reduce use of hotels. And there is language in there right now that we're working on, hopefully getting removed, around they're not going to reimburse municipalities if you're spending more than the monthly GA maximum for a regular housing unit. So if you're spending double that on a hotel, after 30 days, you're on your own paying for it. So no more 30%, no more 70% reimbursement from the state. And then there's been other talk of just banning hotels outright. And we, of course, do not want them to do that, because we need all of the options at our disposal when it comes to housing people on an emergency basis. So.
Board Member Opperman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. What was the income that was realized in the last year on that fund balance, total fund balance? Can you have a number?
So, that's a difficult number to come up with, because it's a point in time calculation. So, the schools referenced having 15 million of fund balance. At any given point, much of that might be obligated for other uses. As the board has noted, they plan on using, is it 3.5 million in this upcoming budget? And I believe over half of it was already encumbered for use. And when you talk about a total budget of 160 something million at the schools, that's approximately 12, $13 million of spending. So even if you had your fund balance available for use, you'd blow through it in just the first month. And then the schools and all of our city departments really rely on the city to provide cash flow for you until those property taxes come in. So, I don't think it's the specific fund balance that's actually invested. It's really the city's general operating account. And that includes a variety of different funds that we use to provide cash flow to all of our city departments. We don't charge interest expense for the departments that are going negative. And so, in the school department specific example, you'd be going negative after just 1 month, and it would be significant. That fund balance would be gone after about a month. Then 2 months in, it'd be negative, 12, 15 million, 3 months, negative 30 million. And the reinforcements wouldn't come until those property tax dollars come in, and they only come in at two distinct points in time. The school also receives some benefits from the city in terms of not getting charged interest expense in a number of other areas, including capital improvement plan projects. A good example of this is the BFOF. I think some people think of BFOF and when the bonds are issued as, oh, there's just all this money sitting there. But in fact, we actually waited to issue the bonds, and we're loaning the city money for about the first 10 to 12 million of some of those first schools. And then when we issued the bonds, the city reimbursed ourselves. We weren't earning interest on those funds when they were, being put to use for the schools. So it really is, a balance where the schools are receiving benefits almost on a year-round basis of the cash that's available. And there was a slide in the packet that showed total fund balance, and that total fund balance is shared between the city and schools. That 2 months is based on the total general fund operating budget of the city and schools combined. And as you can see, last year it was right at the 2 months target, or I guess that's 2 years ago, 6/30/22. It was right at the target, and this year it'll be right at that target again after use of that additional fund balance that's being proposed in the school's budget.
So the question then would come, is it possible to know how the flow of that money in the fund balance is? When is it high? When does it come down? I mean, if you're talking about end point. And the other piece of it is when you are doing, I presume you're taking the money and investing some money from somewhere in the GA. What kind of return on that money are you getting? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I can pull together that information. Obviously rates are constantly changing. We're trying.
Yes. No, I understand.
The cities have an investment policy where we can't invest in too risky of an investment.
I know.
But yeah,
I wouldn't want you to, but it would be nice to see that at another time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll work on pulling that together to be presented at a future meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Not seeing any. So again, this is just an information item. We don't have any action on it. So unless there's anybody with the last word, Brendan, do you have anything?
No, I will just again remind everybody that Monday night's city council meeting is where we're going to be presenting the city manager's recommended budget. It is it's a hybrid meeting. So we need 5 votes to refer it to Finance Committee, and we're going to begin discussing the budget right on Tuesday night. So it'll be a quick turnaround, and we're going to get in depth on some of our departments. I'll do a really deep dive overview of the budget, kind of much deeper than the city manager's budget transmittal letter, which we'll see on Monday. And we are working to hopefully publish something tomorrow, which with the specific departments we're going to discuss on Tuesday.
Well, I know that you have been working on that intensively over the last weeks and months. So thank you for your work on that. Councillor Fournier.
Thank you. And with all of that in mind and budget dates, we are being a little flexible on our end for our Health and Human Services Committee. So normally our regularly scheduled meeting would be next Tuesday. That's just going to be moved out a week to the 16th. And so we'll get everyone confirmations very shortly, if it's not tomorrow, by Monday, of that change. And then the agenda will be published as well.
Thank you for that reminder. Anyone else? Does that cover our final item, which is just dates, or is there more to our dates upcoming? Brendan.
I just want to briefly thank the city's controller, Bill Nadolny, who joined us. He lost power about 5 minutes before the call, so he was the dial-in number that you saw. Thank you so much for all your work on the audit, Bill. We really appreciate you, and we're really lucky to have you. Anne Bilodeau as well. She's heavily involved in the audit. Thank you so much for all of your work, and Tiffany as well. I really appreciate you guys. And that does take care of the dates portion for me.
Okay, perfect.
And I wanted to echo that and to thank Brendan himself for all the work that he's done on all of these items. It's been a lot. I know he and I have talked maybe more than he'd like to talk to me. So thank you, Brendan, and thank you to all of your staff.
And we echo that as well. We appreciate all your work. Brendan and I met earlier this week, and so I know how it's been crazy with this stuff. So, okay, I think that's it. Unless anybody has any last words, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councillor Bullitt, seconded by Councillor Fournier. Councillor Bullitt, how do you vote? That's a yay from Councillor Bullitt. And Councillor Fournier?
Yes.
And I am also a yes. We are adjourned at 6:19. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.